April 12, 1945. The air in the interrogation room is stale, smelling of damp wool and unwashed bodies. Outside, the distant rumble of American convoys shakes the dust from the rafters of a requisitioned Bavarian farmhouse. Inside, the silence is absolute. Sitting on a wooden chair, her posture rigid and her uniform stripped of insignia, sits a Wehrmachthelferin, a female auxiliary of the German army. For 3 weeks, she has offered nothing but name, rank, and a stare cold enough to freeze the room. Across the scarred table, a young American intelligence officer sighs, rubbing eyes red from lack of sleep. The standard playbook of intimidation has failed. He reaches into his field jacket pocket. He doesn't pull out a pistol or a dossier of threats. He pulls out a Hershey's tropical chocolate bar. He slowly peels back the foil, the sound incredibly loud in the quiet room, and slides it across the wood. It is a small block of compressed cocoa and sugar, but in a world starving for calories and comfort, it is about to become the most dangerous weapon in the room. This single gesture is about to crack a secret that artillery could not touch. By the second week of April 1945, the Third Reich is not merely losing the war, it is dissolving. The structured, mechanized precision that once defined the German military machine has disintegrated into a chaotic, sprawling retreat. On the Western Front, the Allied armies under General Dwight D. Eisenhower are sweeping across the Rhine, their armoured columns punching deep into the German heartland. The industrial heart of the Ruhr has been encircled, trapping over 300,000 German soldiers in a pocket of steel and fire. But beyond the headlines of encirclements and surrenders, a quieter, more desperate reality is unfolding on the muddy backroads of Bavaria and Thuringia. The landscape is one of total confusion. The distinction between the front line and the rear area has vanished. American tank destroyers roar past columns of sullen German prisoners, while terrified refugees push handcarts piled high with bedding and clocks, trying to escape the advancing Soviets from the east and the Americans from the west. In this fluid environment, the Wehrmacht is shedding its skin. Soldiers are discarding their Feldgrau tunics in roadside ditches, stealing civilian clothes from farmhouses, and melting into the refugee columns. The rigid hierarchy of the army is breaking down, leaving behind only the most fanatical, the most terrified, and those with nowhere else to go. Underpinning this military collapse is a biological crisis that has been mounting for months. Germany is starving. The Allied strategic bombing campaign has systematically dismantled the Reich's transportation network. Marshalling yards are craters, bridges are twisted steel skeletons lying in riverbeds. The Reichsbahn, the railway system that is the circulatory system of the nation, has suffered cardiac arrest. Without trains, coal cannot reach the power plants, and food cannot reach the cities. The efficient distribution system of the Reichsnährstand, the Nazi food estate, has been replaced by a feral struggle for calories. For the average German civilian and the retreating soldier alike, life has become a grey cycle of ersatz misery. The hunger winter of 1944 has bled into a starving spring. The official ration cards are increasingly worthless pieces of paper. Bread is heavy and damp, extended with sawdust or potato peelings. Coffee is a bitter brew made from roasted acorns or chicory. Meat is a memory. But the most profound absence, the one that gnaws at the psychological resolve of the population, is the absence of sugar and fat. German combat rations, once chemically engineered for high energy, are gone. The Coca-Cola, the caffeine-laced chocolate discs issued to Luftwaffe pilots and panzer crews to keep them alert, disappeared months ago, hoarded by officers or traded on the black market for cigarettes. The human body, deprived of glucose and fat for prolonged periods, enters a state of primal anxiety. Higher cognitive functions give way to a singular obsession with food. In this biological state, political ideology begins to compete with the raw, screaming demand of the metabolism. Yet, amidst this landscape of exhaustion, there remain pockets of intense resistance. Not every German is surrendering. There are those who believe in the propaganda of the Alpine Redoubt, the myth that the Nazi elite will retreat into the mountains of Bavaria and Austria to fight a guerrilla war that could last for years. These true believers are moving furtively through the chaos, carrying documents, maps, and technical data that they are ordered to protect with their lives. They are the hardened core, immunized against the general defeatism by years of indoctrination. They view the chaos around them not as the end, but as a test of will. It is in this fractured environment that the Wehrmachthelferinnen, the female auxiliaries, find themselves in a precarious position. Hundreds of thousands of German women served in uniform, operating radios, managing logistics, and staffing anti-aircraft searchlights. As the front collapses, they are often the ones left guarding the secrets, while the male officers flee or die. They are disciplined, overlooked, and often underestimated by the advancing Allied troops. They are seen merely as secretaries or telephone operators, but many possess a granular knowledge of logistics and operations that the generals have long since forgotten. They hold the keys to the hidden stockpiles, the buried archives, and the escape routes. The chaos of the retreat creates a unique battlefield for intelligence. It is no longer about moving divisions on a map. It is a manhunt. The Allies know that the shooting war is ending, but the information war is reaching its peak. Every captured town, every seized headquarters offers a chance to secure the future or lose it to a fanatic hiding in a cellar. The dust and noise of the collapsing front conceal these high-value targets, making the job of identifying them nearly impossible. Into this swirling vacuum of collapsing authority drives a different kind of American soldier. They do not ride in tanks or march in companies. They travel in small teams, in jeeps, often stripped of their windshields to avoid reflecting the sun, weaving through the traffic of advancing armor. These are the men of the Counterintelligence Corps. While the infantry fights for ground, the CIC fights for information. Their mandate, issued directly from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, is absolute. Secure the Nazi Party's nervous system before it can be transplanted to the mountains. Among these intelligence teams is a specialized group known as the Ritchie Boys. Trained at the secret Camp Ritchie in Maryland, many of these men are German Jewish refugees who fled the Reich in the late 1930s. They have returned to Europe wearing American olive drab, armed not just with Thompson submachine guns, but with a weapon far more potent in this theater, a native fluency in the German language and a deep, intuitive understanding of the German psyche. They know the dialects, the cultural nuances, and the specific anxieties of the people they are hunting. They can distinguish between a terrified conscript and a fanatical ideologue by the cadence of a single sentence. The urgency of their mission is driven by a phantom that haunts the Allied High Command, the Alpenfestung, or Alpine Fortress. Intelligence reports, some genuine, many planted by Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine, suggest that the Nazi elite plan to withdraw into the rugged peaks of Bavaria and Austria. The fear is that they have stockpiled weapons, gold, and advanced technology in vast underground bunkers to wage a suicidal guerrilla war that could bleed the Allies for years. General Eisenhower takes this threat seriously. He shifts the axis of the American advance southwards, away from Berlin, specifically to cut off this potential retreat. Every roadmap, every command roster, and every logistical document becomes a piece of this desperate puzzle. The CIC is hunting for target dossiers, specific locations of command bunkers and hidden depots. It is a needle in a haystack search across a burning continent. In early April, near the town of Gotha, a CIC detachment stumbles upon a lead. A fleeing staff car, marked with the insignia of a high-ranking logistical command, is intercepted, attempting to merge with a civilian refugee column. The driver flees into the woods, but the passenger remains. She is a woman in her late 20s, wearing the grey uniform of a Stabshelferin, a staff assistant. She sits stoically in the back seat, her hands resting on an empty leather document case. The Americans search the vehicle. They find shredded paper, the remnants of burnt files, and a single, partially destroyed listing of grid coordinates. It is incomplete, a fragment of a larger logistical map. But the fragment points to something massive, a supply chain designated Project Hubertus, a code name that has appeared in decrypted radio traffic but has never been located on the ground. The coordinates suggest a facility buried deep within the Thuringian forest, an area bypassed by the main armored thrust. The woman is identified as Hildegard K., a senior administrative assistant to a general of the Quartermaster Corps. She is not a combatant, but she is something far more valuable, a living archive. In the chaotic final days of her department, as officers drank themselves into stupors or fled, she was the one who memorized the evacuation protocols. She knows where the trucks went. She knows what Project Hubertus actually is. And most importantly, the Americans suspect she knows the location of the master map that details the entire underground storage network for the region. She is detained and transported to a forward interrogation center established in a commandeered farmhouse outside the combat zone. The setting is deceptively peaceful, a rustic kitchen with heavy timber beams and a view of a blossoming orchard. But the atmosphere inside is suffocating. The war is ending, but for the Ritchie boy assigned to her case, the clock is ticking faster than ever. If the Hubertus site contains what they suspect, looted art, experimental weaponry, or a holdout of SS officers, getting there before it is sabotaged or seized by the encroaching Soviets is a matter of strategic necessity. Hildegard is processed with the standard efficiency of the US Army. Her personal effects are catalogued: a comb, a family photograph, a small sewing kit, and a completely empty ration tin. She says nothing during the search. She offers no resistance, but she offers no cooperation. She sits in the interrogation chair, smoothing the fabric of her skirt, her face a mask of disciplined indifference. She has been told by her superiors that the Americans are barbarians, that they will torture her, and that she must hold her silence for the honor of the fatherland. She is prepared for pain. She is prepared for screaming. She is prepared to die with her secrets. She is not prepared for what is about to happen. The interrogation begins not with a spotlight, but with a silence that matches her own. The stage is set for a collision between two worlds, the fanatical, starving discipline of a dying regime and the overwhelming material abundance of the American victors. The silence in the farmhouse kitchen stretches into the afternoon. It is a tactical silence, weaponized by both sides. Hildegard K. sits with her spine not touching the back of the wooden chair. This is not merely posture, it is armor. To understand her silence, one must understand the psychological fortress built around the German mind by 1945. She is a product of 12 years of immersion in a totalitarian reality. Since her teenage years in the League of German Girls, she has been taught that the individual is nothing, the Volk is everything, and that suffering is a noble duty. She looks at the American across from her and sees a caricature. Goebbels' propaganda has painted the Americans as gangsters of the air, undisciplined cowboys who rely on overwhelming material wealth because they lack the spiritual depth of the German soldier. She expects him to be crude. She expects him to shout. In a strange way, she wants him to shout. Brutality would validate her worldview. If he strikes her, she becomes a martyr in her own mind, her resistance justified by his barbarism. But beneath the ideological steel, there is a biological reality she is fighting to ignore. She is starving. It is a slow, gnawing emptiness that has been with her for months. Her uniform hangs loosely on her frame. Her skin has the translucent, papery quality of severe caloric deficit. The headache behind her eyes is constant, a dull throb caused by low blood sugar and dehydration. She is maintaining her composure through sheer willpower, locking her knees together to stop them from trembling. She focuses on a knot in the wooden table, narrowing her universe to that single point to block out the smell of coffee drifting from the American mess tent outside. A smell so rich it is almost nauseating. Across the table, Lieutenant Miller watches her. His name is Americanized, but his birth certificate, likely left behind in a Berlin apartment or a Frankfurt clerk's office in 1938, would tell a different story. He is one of the Ritchie Boys. He is not the cowboy Hildegard imagines. He is a German Jewish refugee who fled the Holocaust, trained at the secret military intelligence training center at Camp Ritchie, Maryland. Miller possesses a weapon that no amount of artillery can replicate. He understands her. He hears the specific regional accent in her limited responses, realizing she is from the Rhineland. He notices the way her eyes dart to the window, not to look for escape, but because the light hurts them, a symptom of fatigue. He knows the cultural codes she lives by. At Camp Ritchie, they were taught that interrogation is not about domination, it is about connection, however manipulative that connection may be. They studied the psychology of the enemy, learning to categorize prisoners, the terrifying fanatic, the opportunist, the terrified conscript. Miller categorizes Hildegard as the idealist. Screaming at an idealist only hardens their resolve. Physical threats only prove to them that they are morally superior. To break an idealist, you must not attack their beliefs directly. You must disrupt the environment that sustains those beliefs. You must introduce a variable that their ideology cannot account for. He has spent the last hour asking the standard questions regarding unit designation, chain of command, and destination. She has recited her name, rank, and date of birth with the mechanical rhythm of a metronome. Miller knows he is hitting a wall. He needs to flank her defenses. He leans back in his chair, lighting a cigarette. He offers her one. She refuses with a sharp shake of her head. It is a small rejection, but it tells him she is still operating on a discipline-first basis. She is denying herself comfort to maintain her edge. The room itself represents the collision of two economic realities. On the table sits Miller's gear, a Zippo lighter, a pack of Lucky Strikes, a notepad of high-quality paper, a fountain pen. To Hildegard, these are objects of alien luxury. In Germany, paper is coarse and grey, pens are dry, lighters are out of fluid. The sheer material abundance of the American army is a psychological weapon in itself. Every time Miller takes a drag of his cigarette or effortlessly flips a page in his notebook, he is demonstrating the futility of her resistance. The Wehrmacht is scavenging for fuel to move a single tank. The Americans have enough fuel to drive a jeep to a farmhouse just to interrogate one woman. This asymmetry wears down a prisoner without a word being spoken. It whispers that the war is not just lost militarily, but economically and industrially. Miller decides to change the temperature of the room. He stops asking about the map. He stops asking about the general. He stands up, walks to the window, and speaks in perfect, unaccented German, not the textbook German of a learned scholar, but the vernacular of a native. He tells her softly that the war is over, that the generals are flying to safety, leaving her to walk while they drove. He turns back to her. He sees the micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw. He has touched a nerve. The betrayal of the leadership is the weak point in the armor of the faithful. But she still doesn't speak. She clamps her mouth shut, terrified that if she opens it, something other than defiance might come out. Miller realizes words aren't enough. He needs a physical bridge. He needs something that bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the body. He needs a solvent that can dissolve the glue of her discipline. He reaches into his pocket. To understand the weight of Miller's next move, we must understand the object he holds in his hand. It is a Hershey's tropical chocolate bar. In the logistics of the US Army, it is merely ration D, or a variation thereof, a heat-resistant energy supplement designed to survive in jungles and deserts without melting. It is dense, somewhat grainy, and formulated with oat flour to keep it stable. To an American GI stationed in Paris, it is a poor substitute for real confectionery. But in the shattered economy of 1945 Germany, this block of brown wax is more valuable than a gold Reichsmark. Germany entered the war with a strict rationing system designed to prioritize the Wehrmacht. By 1945, that system has collapsed into a scavenging economy. Sugar is the first luxury to vanish and the last to return. The civilian population has been subsisting on a diet of starch and turnips for years. The absence of sugar is not just a culinary loss, it is a physiological deprivation. The brain runs on glucose. When deprived of it for years, the sudden reintroduction of concentrated sugar acts almost like a narcotic. It triggers a dopamine response that can overwhelm the discipline centers of the brain. For a German soldier or auxiliary, chocolate is mythic. It was the Panzer Schokolade of the Blitzkrieg years, the methamphetamine-laced chocolate that powered the invasion of France. But that is a distant memory. Now, seeing a whole wrapped bar of chocolate is a confrontation with the impossible wealth of the enemy. It represents a supply chain that stretches unbroken from the cocoa fields of the tropics to the factories of Pennsylvania, all the way to a farmhouse table in Thuringia. It is the physical embodiment of unconditional surrender. But for Lieutenant Miller, the chocolate is just a key. The lock is Project Hubertus. The urgency in the room is driven by the strategic nightmare unfolding outside. The CIC knows that every hour Hildegard remains silent is an hour the SS has to burn documents or move the cache. The map she knows the location of is believed to detail a network of underground caverns used to store sensitive technical data, possibly blueprints for the new Type 21 U-boats or jet engine schematics. There is another, darker anxiety driving Miller. The demarcation lines between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union are being drawn. The Red Army is advancing rapidly from the east. If Project Hubertus lies in the future Soviet occupation zone, the Americans have a frantic window of opportunity to secure the intelligence before the Iron Curtain falls. This isn't just about ending World War II anymore. It is about positioning for the next conflict. Miller isn't just an interrogator. He is a scavenger in the wreckage of an empire, racing against allies who are fast becoming rivals. He knows that torture is inefficient. A person in pain will say anything to stop the pain, leading to false intelligence that wastes precious time. He needs the truth, and he needs it voluntarily. He needs her to want to give it to him. He needs to break the spell of the Führer with a spell of his own, the spell of humanity, of normalcy, of sweetness. Miller peels the silver foil back further. The scent of cocoa, faint but distinct, drifts across the stagnant air of the room. It cuts through the smell of dust and damp wool. He sees Hildegard's nostrils flare slightly. It is an involuntary reflex. The biological imperative is waking up, clawing at the walls of her ideological discipline. He places the chocolate in the center of the table. He pushes it forward, inches from her hand. He does not ask a question. He does not demand the map. He simply leans back, crosses his arms, and waits, letting the silence and the sugar do the work. The standoff enters its 4th hour. The sun has moved across the sky, shifting the beam of light from the table to the dusty floorboards. The sounds of the war outside have dulled to a rhythmic thudding of distant artillery, likely the 90th Infantry Division clearing the last pockets of resistance near the town of Merkers. But inside the room, the war is silent and motionless. Hildegard is trembling. It is a physiological tremor she can no longer suppress. Her body, deprived of sustenance, is in revolt. The adrenaline that sustained her during the initial capture has faded, leaving behind a crashing fatigue. Her eyes are fixed on the chocolate bar. It sits on the scarred wood like a dark monolith. The wrapper, silver and maroon, catches the dim light. To her, it is not just food. It is a violation of her reality. To accept it is to accept that the enemy is not the monster she was promised. To eat it is to admit she is human, not just a cog in the machine. Lieutenant Miller watches the sweat bead on her hairline. He checks his watch. 16:30 hours. He knows the timeline. The 11th Armored Division is pushing toward the suspected area of the cache. If they roll past the entrance without securing it, the local Volkssturm or SS stay-behind units could blow the tunnels. He needs the location now. He could bring in the MPs. He could threaten her with handover to the Russians, a standard and terrifying threat used by American intelligence. But his training at Camp Ritchie tells him that fear causes contraction. He needs expansion. He needs her to open up. He sees her hand twitch. She is fighting a war between her indoctrination and her instinct. The Hershey's tropical bar is designed to withstand 120-degree heat, but it is melting slightly in the warmth of the room, the rich aroma becoming stronger, more pervasive. It smells of vanilla and cocoa butter, scents that belong to a childhood before the war, before the rationing, before the burning cities. Miller tells her quietly that it is not poisoned. He picks up the bar, breaks off a single square with a dry snap, and pops it into his own mouth. He chews slowly. He swallows. He puts the rest of the bar back in front of her. He tells her it is just chocolate, American chocolate, full of sugar and energy. He pushes a canteen of water toward her as well, urging her to eat and drink before they talk. Hildegard looks at him. For the first time, she sees not an enemy uniform, but a man who is tired, unshaven, and offering her something she hasn't held in 3 years. The rigid mask of the Wehrmachthelferin cracks. Her lip quivers. Her hand moves, slowly, agonizingly, across the table. Her fingers brush the foil. The texture is real. The decision is made. She grabs the bar, not with the grace of a lady, but with the desperation of a starving animal. She brings the chocolate to her mouth, her hands shaking so violently she almost drops it. The first bite is not a polite nibble. She bites down hard, breaking off a large chunk. As the chocolate hits her tongue, the reaction is instantaneous. The dense, concentrated sugar dissolves, flooding her system with a caloric shock she hasn't experienced since before the war. The room falls silent again, but the tension has shifted. It is no longer the silence of resistance. It is the silence of absorption. She closes her eyes. A tear leaks out from beneath her eyelid, cutting a clean track through the grime on her cheek. Then another. Then she is sobbing, a guttural, heaving sound that seems to come from the bottom of her lungs. It is the sound of total psychological collapse. The armor of the Nazi auxiliary melts away, leaving only a frightened, exhausted young woman from the Rhineland. Miller doesn't interrupt. He doesn't press the advantage immediately. He waits. He slides the canteen closer. She drinks, choking slightly, then eats another piece of chocolate. The sugar is hitting her bloodstream, firing neurons that have been dormant, lifting the fog of starvation. The fanaticism that held her together was brittle, fueled by adrenaline and fear. The kindness and the calories shatters it. She wipes her face with the back of her hand, smearing the dirt. She looks at Miller. The hatred is gone from her eyes, replaced by a profound resignation. She whispers that it is in the mine, not the main shaft, but the ventilation tunnel in the north sector. Miller keeps his face neutral, though his heart is hammering. He slides the notepad and the fountain pen across the table. She picks up the pen. Her hand is still trembling, but she forces it to steady. She draws. It is not a crude sketch. It is the precise, practiced drawing of a staff assistant who has managed these files for months. She draws a grid. She marks the town of Merkers. She draws the main road, the rail line, and then a specific turnoff into the forest that looks like a logging trail. She marks an X over a disguised entrance. She identifies it as Project Hubertus. The archives, the gold, and the art. She explains that they are waiting for the trucks to move it to the Alps, but the trucks have no fuel. She pushes the paper back to him. She looks at the wrapper of the chocolate bar, smoothing it out on the table as if it were a precious document. She has traded the secrets of the Third Reich for 600 calories of sweetness. Miller stands up. He takes the paper. He doesn't smile in triumph. He nods at her, a gesture of respect for the transaction. He walks to the door, opens it, and hands the paper to the waiting sergeant outside. He orders it to be taken to G2 immediately, and for the 90th to be redirected. They have the target. The intelligence generated in that farmhouse kitchen travels up the chain of command at the speed of electricity. Within an hour, the coordinates drawn by Hildegard K are cross-referenced with aerial reconnaissance photos. The logging trail she sketched corresponds to a faint, camouflaged road that disappears into the dense canopy of the Thuringian forest, just north of the verified salt mine complex at Merkers. 12 hours later, elements of the US 90th Infantry Division, supported by combat engineers, roll toward the grid square. They do not find a fortress defended by SS legions. They find exactly what the Wehrmachthelferin described, a quiet, unassuming entrance guarded by a handful of Volkssturm old men who surrender without firing a shot. The blast doors, hidden behind a facade of pine logs, are sealed. It takes the engineers 2 hours to rig the charges and blow them. What they find inside vindicates the chocolate bar strategy 1,000 times over. As the smoke clears and the beams of the flashlights cut through the subterranean gloom, the Americans realize they haven't just found a supply depot, they have found a lung of the Reich. Stacked on pallets, stretching back into the darkness, are not just munitions. There are rows of industrial filing cabinets containing the complete patent records of major German engineering firms, including jet propulsion data, synthetic fuel formulas, and rocketry schematics. Further back, in a climate-controlled section, lie crates marked with the eagles of the Reichsbank. Inside are gold bullion, stacks of Swiss francs, and bags of wedding rings looted from the victims of the Holocaust, the grim, tangible currency of genocide. But the true prize, the one that justifies Miller's patience, is the archive. The map Hildegard revealed leads the CIC agents to a false wall in the rear of the cavern. Behind it lies the operational data for the Alpine Redoubt. The documents found here prove that the redoubt is largely a myth, a propaganda construct by Goebbels to terrify the Allies. There are no vast, impregnable fortresses in the Alps, only scattered, disorganized hideouts. This intelligence is seismic. It reaches supreme headquarters within the day. It allows General Eisenhower to adjust his entire strategic posture. He no longer needs to divert massive resources to grind through the Alps in fear of a phantom guerrilla army. he can focus on the final political consolidation of the occupation. On April 12, the same day as the interrogation, Generals Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton visit the nearby Merkers Mine complex to view a similar haul. The imagery is cinematic and surreal. Three of the most powerful men in history standing in a salt mine 2,000 feet underground, surrounded by billions of dollars in Nazi gold and stolen art. Patton, ever the warrior, looks at the horde with disdain, remarking that they should have just blown up the entrance and left it. But Bradley and Eisenhower understand the deeper reality. This isn't just loot, it is leverage. The chocolate confession didn't just provide coordinates, it provided the context needed to dismantle the Nazi state. By securing the archives, the Allies have the names of the perpetrators, the bank account numbers of the financiers, and the blueprints of the wonder weapons. The confession of a single, starving auxiliary has done what a bombing raid could not. It has captured the memory of the enemy. Back at the farmhouse, the war moves on. The unit packs up. Lieutenant Miller types his final report. He does not mention the chocolate bar in the official log. He simply writes that the prisoner cooperated after prolonged psychological conditioning. Hildegard is transferred to a standard POW holding area. She is given a blanket and a hot meal. She sits in the back of a truck, watching the farmhouse disappear. She is a traitor to a dying regime, but she is alive. And for the first time in years, she is not hungry. The raid on the Thuringian cache is not an isolated victory. It becomes a template. Across the crumbling Reich, the story of the chocolate confession ripples through the intelligence community. It validates a doctrine that the Ritchie Boys have argued for since their training in Maryland, that the Wehrmacht is not a monolith of Aryan supermen, but a collection of exhausted, starving human beings. The soft power of the American supply chain begins to dismantle the Nazi resistance more effectively than Sherman tanks. In village after village, the terrifying image of the American invader, painted by Goebbels as a raping, looting barbarian, is shattered by the reality of the GI. The soldier who stands on a street corner, not shooting, but handing out chewing gum to children and cigarettes to defeated old men, destroys the psychological foundation of the werewolf guerrilla movement. The Nazi leadership had counted on the population's fear to fuel a prolonged insurgency. Instead, the population surrenders to the abundance of the victors. The intelligence recovered from Hildegard's map has consequences that stretch far beyond 1945. The technical data secured from the caves, including wind tunnel test results, synthetic rubber formulas, and ballistics research, is rushed back to the United States. It forms the bedrock of Operation Paperclip, the secret program to recruit German scientists. The Americans realized that the true spoils of this war are not territory, but knowledge. By trading a chocolate bar for a map, Lieutenant Miller didn't just find a bunker, he helped secure the technological future of the West. Furthermore, the interrogation methods of the CIC undergo a quiet revolution. The success of the empathy approach proves that in the chaotic endgame of a war, a prisoner is more likely to break from a gesture of kindness than a threat of violence. The Ritchie Boys, with their German-Jewish heritage, demonstrate a profound historical irony. The very people the Nazis sought to exterminate are the ones who understand them best, and ultimately, the ones who dismantle their secrets, piece by piece. As May 1945 approaches, and the guns finally fall silent across Europe, the physical landscape is one of total ruin. Cities like Cologne and Hamburg are brick dust, but in the interrogation centres, the work continues. The files are organised, the maps are redrawn. The transition from the hot war against fascism to the cold war against communism has begun. And in the pockets of the intelligence officers, alongside their pistols and badges, remain the tools of their trade, packs of Lucky Strikes and bars of Hershey's chocolate. The incident in the farmhouse fades from the daily reports, buried under mountains of logistics. But its legacy remains in the doctrine of the occupation. The Americans do not just conquer Germany, they feed it. They overwhelm the ideology of death with the simple, biological reality of life. War is often measured in tonnage. We count the bombs dropped, the cities leveled, and the divisions destroyed. We look at the maps of 1945 and see arrows of steel piercing the heart of Europe. But the story of Lieutenant Miller and Hildegard K. reminds us that the final battles of the Third Reich were not always fought with high explosives. They were fought in the quiet, dusty corners of the human mind, where biology clashes with belief. The Nazi regime was built on the concept of the Übermensch, the idea that willpower could overcome reality. For 12 years, it demanded that its people ignore their hunger, their fatigue, and their conscience in service of a terrible abstraction. But in that farmhouse kitchen, a simple bar of chocolate exposed the fragility of that lie. The sugar did what the artillery could not. It reminded a soldier that she was, first and foremost, a human being. It is a profound irony of the war that the Ritchie Boys, many of them Jewish refugees who had fled the very hate Hildegard was sworn to defend, were the ones who unlocked the secrets of the Reich. They did not do it by becoming monsters themselves. They did it by recognizing the humanity in the enemy, even when that enemy was starving and silent. They understood that while you can kill a man with a bullet, you can only truly disarm him by offering him a future. The sugar trap was not just a clever interrogation trick, it was a collision between two civilizations. One offered death, glory, and ruin. The other offered life, pragmatism, and a taste of sweetness in a bitter world. When Hildegard reached for that chocolate, the war ended for her. And in the darkness of the Thuringian caverns, the secrets she revealed helped ensure that the darkness would not return.